He never planned to be the world's best-selling author of love stories. In fact, Nicholas Sparks thought his future was on the track until a devastating injury ripped it all away. But what seemed like the end of a dream became the beginning of something no one could have predicted. From a $1 million debut for The Notebook to more than 130 million books sold across the globe, Sparks turned Heartbreak into a publishing empire. His novels became Hollywood blockbusters, his characters household names, and his stories the blueprint for modern romance. Yet behind the fairy tales lies a far messier truth. The tragedies of his own family that bled into his pages, the critics who call his books formulaic tear-jerkers, the controversies that made headlines, and the question that still lingers. How has Sparks managed to reinvent the love story again and again for nearly 3 decades? Here, we'll uncover the untold story behind Nicholas Sparks, the rise, the heartbreak, the Hollywood fame, and the ugly battles that tested the man behind The Notebook, and many other romances we can't stop thinking about.
I'm Nicholas Sparks. I'm the author of The Notebook, A Walk to Remember, Message in a Bottle, Dear John, and most recently, See Me.
From his unlikely beginning to his latest reinvention, this is the journey of an ordinary man who built an extraordinary empire of love. Forget the cozy image of Nicholas Sparks as just the king of sappy love stories. His early life had grit, tragedy, and a few jaw-dropping moments most fans never hear about. This isn't a bedtime story. It's a roller coaster. Nicholas Charles Sparks was born on December 31st, 1965 in Omaha, Nebraska, the last baby of the year. He was the middle child with an older brother, Micah, and a younger sister, Danielle. Money was tight. The family moved constantly, and Sparks later admitted the upheaval made him both shy and hyper-observant, traits that would one day shape every character he wrote. By age 8, he was already devouring piles of library books, sharpening the imagination that would one day fuel his love stories. By high school, he's working long shifts at an ice cream shop and running track like his life depends on it. In high school, he wasn't just smart, he was fast. At 16, he clocked an 800-meter run in 1 minute and 53 seconds. And by age 18, he was also valedictorian of Bella Vista High School. That year, 1984, he landed a full scholarship to the University of Notre Dame, balancing business finance with track. Sparks was 19 when life threw him the first brutal curveball, an Achilles tendon injury that shattered his athletic dreams. He was devastated. His mom gave him a blunt push. Don't just sit there, go write a book. So that summer, he did. The novel went nowhere, but the obsession stuck. Sparks later said, "It was crushing, but I wrote my first novel that summer. I had nowhere else to go but the page."
And my mom got tired of me pouting. She basically said, look, don't just pout, do something. What? She goes, I don't know, go write a book. And I said, okay. I wrote a horror novel. It was terrible. The most important lesson I learned was that I had it in me to finish a novel if I started it.
You could do it.
Right, I knew I could finish.
You do a little bit of writing that's never been published.
He realized writing gave him the same adrenaline high competition once did. One professor's lesson on voice in his lit class only deepened the hunger. By 22, with a magna cum laude degree in hand, he had already written 2 unpublished books and discovered that storytelling was the only race worth running. And there was romance off the track, too. On spring break in Florida, 1988, Sparks met Kathy Coate. On their second date, he told her, "I will marry you." True to his word, they wed in 1989, when Sparks was 23. Tragedy struck weeks later. His mother was killed in a horseback riding accident at age 47. Sparks would later recall the shock as the hardest moment of my young life, a grief that left him searching for meaning. He has said that losing his mother and later his sister Danielle became the emotional seed for A Walk to Remember, explaining, "I drew on their lives, their courage, and their loss to tell a story that could honor them." He threw himself into writing again, finishing a third unpublished novel while moving with Kathy to New Bern, North Carolina, the sleepy coastal town that would become the stage for his fictional worlds. But his first published book is one you've probably never heard of. In 1990, at 24, Sparks co-wrote Wokini with Olympic gold medalist Billy Mills, a spiritual guide that sold tens of thousands of copies. He'd later shrug. Writing may be art, but publishing is a business. During the day, he sold pharmaceuticals. At night, he's grinding out stories. By 28, he was drafting the tale inspired by his wife's grandparents' enduring love. He called it The Notebook.
Inspired by family events, how many are entirely fictional? That's really hard to answer. The story was not inspired by any events in my life, but the characters were. The two characters. The character was modeled after someone that I know, both of them. Walk to Remember was inspired by my sister, Message in a Bottle by my father. The Notebook was originally inspired by my wife's grandparents. Dear John was inspired by my cousin.
A track injury, A Mother's Dare, 2 practice novels no one saw, and a midnight grind few would believe. By 29, Sparks is on the edge of literary history. He was about to sell one for $1 million and explode onto the world stage. A young agent named Teresa Park pulls his manuscript from the slush pile and takes a bet on an unknown. Within months, she negotiates a $1 million advance. A once-in-a-generation lightning strike that will change everything. The year is 1996. Nicholas Sparks is 30 years old, a pharmaceutical salesman from North Carolina whose manuscript has just defied the odds. The Notebook isn't simply published, it detonates. Released in October, it rockets onto the New York Times bestseller list in its very first week and stays there for more than a year. Critics called it sentimental, but readers, they couldn't get enough.
I just read The Notebook last night in one sitting, and I'm just kind of disappointed in myself about that, but it still made me cry nonetheless. I know once I got to page 46, I sobbed. And then, again, I sobbed at page, I don't know, somewhere in the hundreds. I started crying again, and then that's when the tears didn't stop. This is the book. If you want to read a really good romance novel.
Sparks would later admit even he was stunned. I thought if it sold 8,000 copies, I'd be lucky. I never imagined millions instead. It became the book that crowned him the new king of romance. Hollywood wasted no time circling. By 1997, New Line Cinema had acquired the rights, and although the film wouldn't release until 2004, the deal cemented Sparks as more than just an author. He was now a brand. At age 31, he quit his sales job for good. But life off the page was turbulent. In the late 1990s, Sparks and Kathy were raising 5 children in New Bern, juggling sudden fame with family obligations. The tragedies kept echoing. His younger sister Danielle lost her battle with brain cancer in 2000 at just 33 years old. Sparks poured his spirit into A Walk to Remember, a novel he wrote in 1999 when he was 33. He dedicated it to her, saying, "In many ways, my sister was Jamie Sullivan, and I wrote the book hoping to honor her life. The story of a rebellious teen transformed by love and by the quiet courage of a dying girl struck a cultural nerve. When it was adapted into a film in 2002, starring Mandy Moore and Shane West, the movie grossed nearly $50 million worldwide and became a teen classic. Sparks was now a household name, but the label came with baggage. Critics dismissed his novels as tearjerkers by formula. Sparks pushed back. Every novel is different. I don't sit down and say, how do I make people cry? I try to write a story that feels real. Still, the reputation stuck and fueled a debate that followed him for decades. Was Nicholas Sparks a genuine chronicler of human emotion, or the literary equivalent of fast food? Meanwhile, the hits kept coming. Message in a Bottle in 1998, The Rescue in 2000, Nights in Rodanthe in 2002. Each one found its way onto bestseller lists, and Hollywood kept calling. By the time A Walk to Remember hit theaters, Sparks was no longer just an author. He was the architect of a new era of commercial romance, one both adored and scorned in equal measure. This was Nicholas Sparks at the dawn of his empire, adored by millions, questioned by critics, haunted by personal loss, and at 36 wondering how long the magic could last. In the early 2000s, Nicholas Sparks was a brand unto himself. Hollywood was cashing in, bookstores were stacking his titles front and center, and fans devoured every release. But success came with heat, from critics, from the press, and sometimes from his own choices. In 2003, Sparks released The Guardian, a darker romantic suspense novel, proving he wasn't afraid to bend his formula. He said later, "I didn't want to be pigeonholed forever. I wanted to try something new." Fans were surprised. Some loved the shift, others missed the familiar weep-worthy formula. Then came 2004. The Notebook film adaptation, directed by Nick Cassavetes and starring Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams, which became a cultural phenomenon. The rain-soaked kiss won an MTV Movie Award and ignited a new generation of fans. Sparks, at 38, was suddenly more than an author. He was the man behind the most iconic love scene of the decade. Tabloids even speculated whether Gosling and McAdams' off-screen chemistry mirrored Sparks' own fictional romances. Their fiery, short-lived real romance gave the film even more cultural weight. The Hollywood pipeline kicked into overdrive. Message in a Bottle had already been a hit in 1999, but now adaptations became almost annual. Nights in Rodanthe in 2008 reunited Richard Gere and Diane Lane, both household names, as older lovers confronting regret and loss. The film grossed nearly $85 million worldwide, showing Sparks' appeal spanned generations. Dear John, released in 2010, starring Channing Tatum and Amanda Seyfried, dethroned Avatar at the box office on its opening weekend and went on to gross over $115 million worldwide. Sparks himself noted, "That was the moment I realized my books had truly crossed into pop culture." Dear John also unleashed a social media storm, with fans debating whether its tragic ending was cathartic or cruel. And he wasn't just selling rights. Sometimes he was crafting the scripts himself. The last song, released in 2010, was written in tandem with Disney as a starring vehicle for Miley Cyrus, who was just breaking away from her Disney Channel image. Sparks later admitted, "I was writing the novel and the screenplay simultaneously, which was insane. But it gave me control over the story. The gamble paid off." The film grossed nearly $90 million, launched Liam Hemsworth's Hollywood career, and tied Sparks' brand to pop culture tabloid headlines as Cyrus and Hemsworth's romance played out publicly. But behind the glossy premieres, fractures showed. Critics hammered him for cookie-cutter heartbreaks. One review sneered, "Sparks writes the same couple over and over. He just changes their names." Literary critics dismissed him as lowbrow. Sparks pushed back, "I don't write for critics. I write for people who love to feel something." Meanwhile, his personal life was stretched thin. Raising 5 children while juggling book tours, press junkets, and Hollywood contracts was overwhelming. Rumors began to circulate that his marriage was under strain. For fans, it was a cruel irony. The man who wrote about everlasting love was fighting to keep his own family balance intact. By 2010, Sparks was 45 years old with more than 50 million copies sold, 5 major film adaptations, and a reputation that was both enviable and precarious. He had conquered Hollywood and built an empire of love stories, but the louder the applause grew, the sharper the criticism became. And in the next decade, those pressures, from fame, from family, from controversy, would erupt in ways few could have predicted. The 2010s began with Nicholas Sparks on top of the world. By now, nearly every book he touched turned into a bestseller, and Hollywood kept buying the rights before manuscripts even hit shelves. But the higher the climb, the harder the spotlight burned. Between 2010 and 2015, Sparks released Safe Haven, The Best of Me, and The Longest Ride, and Hollywood wasted no time snapping them up. Safe Haven, released in 2013, starred Julianne Howe opposite Josh Duhamel, a thriller-tinged romance that grossed over $97 million worldwide. The Best of Me, released in 2014, featured James Marsden and Michelle Monaghan, drawing in longtime fans despite critics calling it predictable. And The Longest Ride, released in 2015, starring Scott Eastwood and Britt Robertson, blended bull riding with love story melodrama and pulled in nearly $63 million at the box office. By his mid-40s, Sparks had more film adaptations under his belt than most novelists manage in a lifetime. Yet the more his stories filled theaters, the sharper the criticism became. The New York Times dismissed his prose as relentlessly manipulative. Social media coined the phrase Sparks fatigue, with readers joking that you always knew a Nicholas Sparks character would end up sick, dead, or heartbroken by the final chapter. And then came the controversies. In 2014, a former employee filed a lawsuit alleging Sparks fostered a hostile work environment at the Epiphany School of Global Studies, the private Christian school Sparks had co-founded in his hometown of New Bern, North Carolina. Sparks denied the allegations, but the lawsuit accused the school of hostility toward LGBTQ students and faculty, and even alleged he tried to silence conversations about diversity. In filings, the plaintiff claimed Sparks told the school board he opposed an LGBTQ club. Sparks publicly responded, "I have never been discriminatory." Any statements otherwise are false headlines, painted him less as the king of romance and more as a hypocrite hiding behind love stories. Media outlets from The Guardian to Entertainment Weekly ran think pieces questioning if Sparks's brand of love stories could survive modern scrutiny. On Twitter, fans sparred over hashtags, some accusing him of hypocrisy, others insisting he was being unfairly targeted. The controversy made him a trending topic, not for a new novel, but for the culture war he had stumbled into. The lawsuit was later settled, but the damage was done. His name was now entangled with culture war debates over faith, sexuality, and tolerance. Fans were divided. Some defended Sparks fiercely. He gave us The Notebook, who cares what the critics say? Others questioned if the man who built an empire on ideals of compassion was living up to his own narratives. For the first time, Sparks's brand of wholesome romance looked messy in the public eye. Meanwhile, his personal life unraveled. In 2015, after 25 years of marriage, Sparks and Kathy announced their divorce. The news stunned readers. How could the man who wrote about forever love not keep his own? Sparks kept the details private, but admitted in an interview, "Like anyone, I've faced struggles in my personal life that I never expected." For a writer who once promised happily ever afters, the irony was brutal. At 50 years old, Sparks was a millionaire many times over, with global sales surpassing 100 million copies. Yet he was also a lightning rod, beloved by fans, ridiculed by critics, and shadowed by scandal. The world was asking, could Nicholas Sparks still be the voice of romance in an era when even his own story looked like it had lost its shine? After years of firestorms, Sparks refused to fade. By 2017, he was 52 years old, divorced, and carrying the scars of lawsuits and tabloid headlines. Many thought the Nicholas Sparks era had peaked, but Nicholas had other plans. In 2018, he released Every Breath, a story spanning decades and continents, reminding readers that he could still deliver sweeping, tear-stained romances. The book debuted at #1 on the New York Times list, proof that millions still wanted to feel the Sparks formula. He told people, "Every book has to feel different. I spend months shaping the idea before I even write a word." He doubled down on his routine, 6 months to draft, endless revisions, and a laser focus on emotional payoffs. When asked how he keeps the ideas fresh, he explained, "People tell me stories." A stranger once said, "You've never written about people in their 50s and 60s." That sparked a new novel. Real life inspires me more than anything else, and the adaptations never stopped. The choice hit theaters in 2016, starring Benjamin Walker and Teresa Palmer. Though critics were divided, fans swooned, and the film grossed over $23 million in the U.S. alone. Around the same time, whispers circulated about a television series in development, rumored to adapt several of his novels into a long-form streaming format, though details have remained scarce. In 2020, Sparks inked a first-look deal with Universal Pictures, signaling Hollywood wasn't done with him yet, and Broadway entered the mix. The Notebook musical, which opened in 2024, drew packed houses and glowing reviews for its emotional staging. Theater critics praised its score by Ingrid Michaelson and its ability to translate Sparks's intimate prose into sweeping stagecraft. The man critics had dismissed as formulaic was suddenly filling theaters, not with films, but with live audiences sobbing into playbills. Meanwhile, his philanthropy continued through the Nicholas Sparks Foundation, funding scholarships and global education initiatives. Supporters argued this was the real Sparks, committed to love, family, and opportunity. Detractors pointed out that his controversies still lingered online, where every new project reignited debate. And then came Counting Miracles, his 2024 novel, quickly optioned by Amazon MGM Studios for adaptation with M. Night Shyamalan attached as producer. Sparks laughed in an interview. "I never imagined I'd work with Shyamalan. It just goes to show. You never know where a story will take you." The book shot to #1, cementing his staying power nearly 3 decades after The Notebook. By his late 50s, Sparks had sold more than 130 million books, seen over a dozen screen adaptations, and weathered enough storms to sink lesser careers. The question now wasn't whether Nicholas Sparks could survive. It was how he kept coming back again and again with new stories of love, loss, and redemption. For fans, the answer was simple. Sparks was still giving them the romances they could never forget. For critics, the debate raged on. And for Nicholas Sparks, the next chapter was already waiting to be written. Nicholas Sparks has often been asked the same question. How do you keep coming up with new love stories after nearly 3 decades? His answer reveals a side of the author few readers ever glimpse, the craftsman behind the curtain. Sparks is notoriously disciplined. He wakes before dawn, often starting to write at 5:30 a.m. and pushing through until lunchtime. He's described his process bluntly. "I treat it like a job. 6 days a week, a minimum of 2,000 words a day when I'm drafting. That routine, he insists, is what separates dreamers from authors. Everyone has an idea for a novel. Very few people sit down and finish it. Inspiration, he admits, comes from unexpected places. A casual conversation with a stranger, an anecdote from a fan, or even something overheard in an airport terminal might spark the seed of a story." He once told an interviewer, "People think I sit around waiting for a muse. In reality, people hand me stories all the time. Real life is stranger and more moving than anything I could invent." His research methods are just as rigorous. Sparks has interviewed doctors about rare illnesses, studied court transcripts for legal plot lines, and traveled to small towns across the Carolinas to capture their rhythms. He believes authenticity is what makes readers cry. If the details don't ring true, the emotion won't either. Yet Sparks is not above abandoning a project. He's confessed that he has 6 unfinished manuscripts in a drawer, stories that simply didn't have the spark. One, he said, was scrapped after 200 pages because he realized the characters weren't compelling enough to sustain a love story. "If I'm bored, readers will be too," he explained. This glimpse into his process adds depth to the legend. Sparks isn't simply a man touched by luck. He is a craftsman who built a factory of feeling, brick by brick, sentence by sentence. His discipline and his willingness to throw away months of work if it isn't right may be the secret ingredient that keeps his romances resonant across generations. Nicholas Sparks is now approaching 60, a number that surprises even him. From the outside, he is the best-selling author of love stories alive today. But inside the literary world, he remains polarizing. A man who made readers weep but made critics groan. The contradiction is his legacy. His fans still line up for signings, clutching battered copies of The Notebook. On TikTok, teens cry over Jamie and Landon from A Walk to Remember, discovering a story written before they were born. On Broadway, audiences stand to applaud The Notebook musical. Sparks once said, "Stories endure when they're about what matters most: love, family, and sacrifice." 3 decades later, he's proven his own point. But the questions hang in the air. Did Sparks elevate the love story or reduce it to a formula? Is he a genius at capturing universal emotions or a savvy businessman, packaging heartbreak for profit? The answer depends on who you ask. One truth is undeniable. His influence on pop culture is immense. He bridged the gap between paperback romance and Hollywood mainstream. He turned tearjerkers into blockbusters. And he proved that even in a cynical age, audiences crave stories that make them feel. As Sparks looks ahead, his career isn't slowing. Another film deal is rumored, his foundation continues its work, and whispers of a streaming series circle the industry. He is, in his own words, still just a man writing one story at a time. Whether you love him or dismiss him, Nicholas Sparks has built something rare. An empire of romance that continues to stir hearts, divide opinions, and spark debate. And that may be the most unforgettable chapter of all. From a shattered Achilles tendon on a college track to a shattered reputation in the tabloids, Nicholas Sparks has lived through rises and falls that sound almost like the plots of his own novels. He turned heartbreak into global bestsellers, transformed love letters into Hollywood gold, and weathered scandals that could have ended it all. His story isn't neat and it isn't perfect, but that's what makes it human. And maybe that's why, decades later, readers still reach for his books and audiences still cry at his adaptations. Because in Nicholas Sparks' world, love is never easy, but it's always worth the ride. As Sparks himself once wrote, "I am nothing special, of this I am sure. But I have loved another with all my heart and soul, and to me, this has always been enough." If Nicholas Sparks taught us anything, it's that love stories never really end. They just turn the page. So if you've been swept up in his saga, hit subscribe and join us for the next chapter. Up next, we dive into the queen of modern romance herself, Huang. You won't want to miss how her stories are rewriting the rules of love for a new generation.